So let's talk about a huge topic, one with a history that's probably not what you think: patriarchy. It's so easy to just assume that male dominated societies have always been the default, right? Well, today we're going to dig into some fascinating history that flips that whole idea on its head. All right, let's get into it.
So let's just start with the biggest question of all, the one that kind of sits underneath so many of our ideas about how the world works. Was society always run by men? An answer, which might actually be a little shocking, is a pretty clear no. The evidence we have shows that for the vast majority of human history, back in our hunting and gathering days and even early farming, male domination just wasn't the standard. It wasn't this universal natural thing at all. So, if that's true, how in the world did we get to where we are now? Here's the roadmap for how we're going to break it down. We'll start by busting that myth of eternal patriarchy. Then, we'll see how the rise of cities completely changed the game, which led to states, wealth, and new ways of controlling people. We'll also look at a pretty simple piece of tech, the plow, and finish up with a story of 4 rivers that shows this whole process was a lot more complicated than you'd think. Okay, first up, let's deconstruct that big myth, that core assumption that men have just always been in charge. So, what was the real turning point? All the evidence points to one massive, world-changing development: the rise of the city. And this whole revolution kicked off around 3500 BCE. But what's really wild is that it didn't just happen in one place. It popped up almost at the same time in 4 totally different river valleys. You had Mesopotamia, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates. You had Egypt, thriving along the Nile. Then there was the Indus River Valley. And of course, early Chinese civilizations along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. This is where our story really begins. So, as these cities grew, they triggered a kind of domino effect, starting with 3 things that are all connected: the state, wealth, and control. And this created a really powerful chain reaction. See, first, you get the state, which comes into being to manage all these people packed into one place. This process starts to concentrate a ton of wealth and power into the hands of a small elite. And once you have all that wealth, family lineage, passing it down to your kids, becomes absolutely critical. Which leads to the final step. To make sure that wealth stays in the family, you have to start controlling women's lives and their sexuality. And this is where the idea of private property takes a really dark and, frankly, unexpected turn. It stopped being just about owning land or animals. In this new city-based world, the very concept of property expanded to include people. Specifically, a woman's ability to have children became something that could be owned, managed, and even traded. Marriage itself just completely transformed. It went from being a personal relationship to an economic contract, where, and this is a quote, a bride's father exchanged her reproductive capacity for wealth and household goods. Suddenly, a daughter becomes a financial asset, and making sure you knew who the father was became the most important thing for keeping that wealth inside the family line. But this whole story isn't just about politics and money. A single, pretty simple piece of technology also played a massive role in all this: the plow. You see, the shift from using a simple hoe to using a big, heavy plow for farming changed everything. With hoe agriculture, women were often right there in the mix, working in gardens close to home. Their contribution to the food supply was obvious, it was visible. But the plow, that's a different story. It required more upper body strength, and it moved farming into big fields, far away from the home. That work became almost exclusively men's work, which dramatically increased their control over the families and the community's resources. Now, this is really the crucial part to understand. This wasn't some evil plot that happened overnight. It was a slow, gradual process. These growing cities needed more and more food, which meant more intensive farming and bigger families to work the land. For women, having more children meant they had less time for that heavy fieldwork. So a shift to domestic work probably just made sense to everybody at the time. But the unintended result was this slow-motion erosion of women's economic power and their social standing. But, and this is a big but, this story did not play out the same way everywhere. The rise of patriarchy really depended on where you were in the ancient world. Just look at Mesopotamia versus, say, Egypt. Mesopotamia was on these wide-open plains, so they were dealing with constant warfare. And what do you see there? Tighter and tighter restrictions on women. But then you look at Egypt and the Indus Valley. They were protected by deserts and mountains. they were more secure, and in those societies, women held on to way more freedom and social equality.
So you might be asking, how do we actually know this stuff? I mean, it was thousands of years ago. Well, one of the best windows we have into what a society valued is its laws. Now, law codes might just be wishful thinking from the people in power, but they still give us a fascinating peek into what a society was striving for.
And when you look at the laws from Mesopotamia, the shift is just staggering. Around 2000 BCE, if you killed a woman, it was a capital offense. You'd be put to death. Fast forward just 250 years to the famous Code of Hammurabi, and the punishment for killing a common woman was just a fine. I mean, it's hard to find a clearer example of how the legal value of a woman's life just plummeted.
Okay, now check out this fascinating little detail that seems totally backwards at first. In ancient Syria, the reward for returning a runaway female slave was double the reward for a male slave. Why? Well, it goes right back to that theme of controlling reproduction. Female slaves weren't just valued for their labor. They were valued for their ability to have children and for their domestic work, which, in the eyes of their owners, made them a much more valuable piece of property.
So let's pull all this together. If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that patriarchy was not natural. It wasn't inevitable. It wasn't always here. It was a historical development, born from a very specific cocktail of forces. You had the rise of the state, the concentration of wealth, and this new idea of private property, and that critical technological shift to plow agriculture.
And that really leaves us with one last, really important question to think about. If patriarchy was built by these ancient forces, how do those very same structures of power, property, and family lineage, born thousands of years ago in those river valleys, how do they continue to echo and shape our world right here, right now?